let's get right to the bottom line. The free market was supposed to be a self-correcting system, but it's being fundamentally broken by a massive concentration of power. So what happens when the invisible hand that's meant to guide the economy just isn't there anymore? Welcome to the MoniLytics channel, where money meets research. Let's just start with this one staggering number: $42 trillion. Now, according to the research, that is how much new wealth the world's top 1% has managed to capture since 2020 alone. And to put that in perspective, that's nearly 2/3 of all new wealth created on the entire planet during that time. You know, when you see a number like that, it really forces you to ask a pretty tough question. The whole foundation of modern economics is built on this promise that an invisible hand guides free markets toward balance and prosperity for everyone. But when you look at the data, you just have to ask, where on earth is that hand? To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to go back to the beginning. We need to revisit that foundational promise of capitalism, the idea that free markets, if you just leave them alone, can brilliantly allocate resources and stabilize the whole economic system, all without needing some central planner calling the shots. This is the core belief, right? When every single person pursues their own self-interest, a baker trying to sell bread, a shopper looking for the best deal, all those individual actions magically combine to create an outcome that's good for society as a whole. It's a really elegant idea, and it's the absolute bedrock of modern capitalism. Okay, so let's really dig into this. What exactly is this mechanism? What is this invisible hand that was supposed to keep everything in balance and prevent the kind of extreme wealth concentration we're seeing today? The term, of course, comes from the legendary economist Adam Smith. And it's not a literal hand, obviously. It's a metaphor for how prices, driven by simple supply and demand, act like these little signals that guide the entire economy, supposedly way more efficiently than any government or committee ever could. And hearing it in Smith's own words really drives the point home. The benefit to society isn't planned. Nobody intends for it to happen. It's supposed to be what they call an emergent property, something that just arises naturally from millions of separate decisions. Now, this whole idea is actually part of something even bigger called spontaneous order, which was really explored by thinkers like Michael Polanyi. The theory is that incredibly complex functional systems, like a language or a bustling city or a market, can emerge completely organically from the bottom up without any top-down design. All you need is the right underlying mechanism. So how does this actually work in practice? Well, the price mechanism is the absolute key. It's like a giant information system. Imagine everyone suddenly wants to buy a new product. Demand soars. What happens next? Prices shoot up. That price spike is a signal. It's like a giant flashing light telling entrepreneurs, hey, there's an opportunity here. So new producers jump into the market. That creates more competition, which pushes the supply up. And finally, all that new competition brings prices back down until things stabilize. That's equilibrium. Okay, so that's the theory. And it sounds great, right? A beautiful, elegant, self-correcting machine. But the evidence we started with, that $42 trillion, tells a very different story. So let's pivot now from that clean theory to the much, much messier reality. And right here, this is probably the single most important thing to understand in this whole discussion. The invisible hand is not a law of nature like gravity. It's conditional. It only works if a specific environment exists. And the number one absolutely critical ingredient for that environment is real, genuine competition. In the textbooks, the ideal setup for this is something called perfect competition. It's a purely theoretical world where you have tons of buyers and sellers, nobody has any real power to set prices, and new companies can jump in and out of the market with no problem. It's like a pristine laboratory where the invisible hand is supposed to work its magic. And then there's the real world. Just take a look at the market for search engines. The data here is pretty stark. One company, Google, controls over 90% of the market. This isn't just not perfect competition. It is the complete and total opposite. And this is what that dominance actually looks like. You get one player with overwhelming control. You get ridiculously high barriers that make it almost impossible for a newcomer to even try to compete. And crucially, that dominant player becomes a price maker, not a price taker. They set the terms. In an environment like this, those self-correcting forces of competition, they just can't work. Now, this kind of market dominance, it doesn't just happen by accident.
It's actively defended. What we see is that these massive firms often take very specific strategic actions, not to create better products, but simply to stamp out the competition, which just makes the market's invisible hand even weaker.
This quote right here from Meta's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, it just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the modern playbook for market dominance. Why would you risk a fair fight, a real battle of innovation in the marketplace, when you can just open your wallet and buy any company that might one day become a threat?
And you can see this exact philosophy at work. Think about it. Meta didn't go out and build the world's best photo sharing app. It bought Instagram. It didn't invent the next great messaging service. It bought WhatsApp. These moves weren't just about getting new technology. They were about neutralizing future rivals before they could get big enough to be a real problem.
And this is why this practice is so damaging to the whole system. These aren't mergers for synergy or to create something better. They are strategic strikes designed to take a potential competitor off the board before the game even starts. The invisible hand can't guide new companies to challenge the big guys if the big guys just buy them all up.
Okay, so if the hand is failing, if the market can't seem to correct itself, then what? What's the answer? Well, it's not really about throwing out the whole idea of markets. It's about asking what it would take to make them actually function the way they're supposed to.
And this is the real takeaway here. It's not that Adam Smith was wrong. It's that the invisible hand isn't a magical force or a law of physics. It's an outcome. It's something that only emerges from a system that has certain rules and conditions. And that number one condition, competition, has been seriously eroded.
And you know what's really interesting? This isn't some new radical idea. Adam Smith himself was deeply worried about monopolies. He wrote about the power of cartels to conspire against the public. He knew, even back then, that for his theory to work, the market had to be protected from players who were powerful enough to rig the whole game.
So this brings us to the idea of a visible guardrail. In other words, competition law. And there are different ways to do it. The US model, for example, has historically focused on protecting competition for the sake of consumer welfare, often acting after a problem has already occurred. The EU model, on the other hand, is a bit different. It's more focused on protecting the actual structure of the market, taking a more preventative approach to stop a company from becoming too dominant in the first place. Now, the point isn't that one is perfect, but that both recognize a healthy market needs rules to function.
And all of this really leaves us with one big final question that reframes the entire debate. When we say free market, do we mean a market with zero rules, where the most powerful player inevitably takes over? Or do we mean a market with a clear set of rules that ensures everyone is actually free to compete on a level playing field? If you found this research valuable, please like the video, subscribe to MoniLytics, and check out the affiliate links in the description to support the channel. And stay tuned for our next deep dive, where we'll be shifting our focus to there are only 3 ways to get paid. Which pillar are you on?